All right, here we go. Now we'll get started. So thank you guys for joining us. Like I said, I put the tiny URL in the chat. So if you guys have any questions or anything, go ahead and click on there. It has a bunch of resources in there that we're going to discuss later. Of course, here's your charter team. Everybody that knows anything about what we're talking about today is right here for you. And this slide I always just keep in here so that you guys have access to it. If you need definitions on anything that is related to LCAP, or if anybody has questions, that's what this slide is for. So there's some information for you. Our agenda today, it's pretty basic. I know we've scheduled till noon, but I honestly don't plan on going till noon. I know we all have a lot of other things that we're doing. So we're going to talk about defining the base, goals and actions with metrics, and then increase and improve services. And then I'm just going to touch on the e-template and if anyone has any questions on that. So where are we now? We don't know where we are right now. We're in a world of unknowns. We don't know if deadlines will be postponed or delayed. We don't know about any grace or what stakeholder input looks like, stakeholder engagement looks like right now. We do know that from our last state and federal program directors meeting, there is conversation happening, obviously, up at the CDE about what should happen. They did get some input from us. They asked us, you know, what are you hearing from districts and charters and about changes that should be made. They did reconvene the charter team. One of the issues is that the state board and the superintendent can't just make a statement and say, oh, we're going to postpone this. It has to be it has to come from the governor's office. So we're hoping maybe for an executive order. I think they are getting closer to making a decision, but we won't know until something official comes out. I did put on this slide, and I did update the slide actually this morning, some places you can get information. So if you want email updates, there's the listserv. And then if you have Instagram and Twitter, which is kind of where I'm getting a lot of my information nowadays, at least at home, is their Instagram and their Twitter following, in case you want to get information there. But like we said, guidance is forthcoming. We don't have any concrete answers for you guys right now, but please keep asking the questions, because as soon as you do, we can ask. And like we always say, right, when we're teaching, if you have that question, somebody else probably does too. So please make sure that you're asking the questions. As of right now, though, timelines are still the same. The expectation is still the same. One of the things about LCAP is it's tied to budget. So we have to follow the timelines until they tell us otherwise, because our budget adoption is related with our LCAP, or LCFF. So one of the things that we have to remember is originally they had said that when we were presenting our LCAP, we had to present our data that we were using for our local indicators. So I know I was just having a conversation with Camille about some parent surveys that were being done. That kind of information is the kind of information, if you're using it for part of your local indicators, that you would want to be reporting that data at a board meeting. I know people are doing virtual board meetings. There's a lot of different things happening, and that's a possibility if that's what you need to do. So, all right, we're gonna do defining the base. Before we do that, Brian, are there any questions so far that we need to address?
A few people might be maybe joined a little late and didn't see your original link, so I just reposted it.
Perfect.
And
thank you.
also, just a reminder to everyone, please mute your mic, because we're getting a little crosstalk in the background. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. So defining the base. This is something that I've wanted to talk to you guys about for a couple of sessions here, workshops, and it was falling onto this workshop, and we talked as a team and decided that we do need to move forward with it, because defining the base is something that's really important. So it sets our mindset for effective planning and provides some practical advice for using, for development and improving your programs. So what are we using that so that we can, using the LCAP to guide and develop implementation. So what is defining the base? We know what it does, but what is it? It enables the leaders to anticipate plans for changes in funding, I mean, how appropriate is that right now, right? We don't know what it's going to look like next year or the year after, and we might need to make some changes. You know, I know people are getting laid off left and right. Everything is changing right now. So this is just a perfect time to actually start having this conversation. All right, here's the different types of grants that most of us receive for funding through LCFF. So we have our base grants, we have our supplemental grants, our concentration, and then any other kinds of grants that you might get, your title funds, any kind of other funding sources that you get. So this is just a really great slide to show all of the different types of funding that you might be receiving, and then what are those funds for. And remember, that's the purpose of our LCAP, is to explain when we do get those funds, what are we doing for those students that's above and beyond, or that's going to increase and improve services for those students. All right. So what we want to do when we're defining the base is a mindset shift. We want to shift from planning for compliance to planning for performance. And instead of saying, hey, we have this funding, we should buy this program and give it out to our students, we're thinking about what do our students need, what program's going to fit that need, and then how are we going to pay for it? So it's a little bit of a shift in how we're doing things. We want to, when we're defining the base, we want to go back to the basics. So you want to think about what is your base program, what is your core program, and then what's supplemental, or what's going to be used to increase and improve services. So base is what is routinely needed to open school. And that is like legally, what do you need to open your school? You need facilities, you're going to need teachers, you're going to need furniture, you're going to need books. What is the basic things that you need? Your core is, okay, now we have our basic needs. What do we need to improve services for all of our students? What are some programs that we're going to need to put into place so that everybody can perform at grade level? And then supplemental is above and beyond. So what are those services that we need to offer to our specific student groups for them to be able to be successful? So those are just some definitions that we're going to use throughout this section here. In the shared folder, I've attached a document. It's about, it's a way for you to go through and be able to see, put your information down on the document. So you would want to start thinking about this in different facets of your school. So staffing, teachers, principals, counselors, and then think about what if that is base. Now, one of the things that we always go back to is the, like counselors. That's a conversation that we have. So yes, you should have counselors. That should be part of your base. But what's the ratio? Is it 500 to 1? Is it, you know, what is the ratio that you need? 1,000 to 1, which sounds crazy. But if you have a base of your counselors, then maybe you can use your supplemental funds to help pay for some more counselors if that's what you need. So it's just something to start thinking about. Remember that base is legally required. It's almost impossible to go to Ed Code and look for exactly what is legally required. And I've asked, so it's not easy to do, but definitely look at your Williams requirements. You want to think about, there is some facility pieces in Ed Code if you want to look at that information. It's out there. So what is the basics that you need to open a school? This is a hard part of the conversation, and we can help you with this conversation. We've done it with a few districts. But a lot of times people think if I'm not in the base, then I could be on the chopping block. And that's not true. What base is, like I said, is just the base, the basics. What do you need to open school? And then we look at what do we need for effective support? So the things that we've put in here with staffing is no combo classes. Maybe that's something that you are passionate about in your school. So you don't want to have combination classes. So you're going to be willing to pay that extra FTE that is above and beyond. So even though you could have done a combo class, a 2-3 class, you decide, I don't want to do that. I'm going to hire a second grade teacher instead. That's an effective support. And then supplemental is above and beyond. So now we don't have a combo class because that's a core support and we don't want to have to, you know, combine those kiddos together. But now what can I do above and beyond? You know, what is necessary for my kids who are struggling my ELs who are struggling with reading. Maybe we hire a reading tutor specifically to work with those kiddos, and that would be a use of supplemental funds. All right. We always have to think about, when we're talking about spending our money and purchasing programs and anything that we do, is because we have or offer or do this thing, we notice this impact. So one of the most important things that you can do when you are talking about BASE and talking about supplemental funding and talking about programs and actions to put into place with your kiddos is think about, how are you going to measure that? And how are you going to know that that was what was the effective piece to your program that made such and such happen? If we just throw a whole bunch of things into the pot, then we don't know what was the most effective thing, and we don't know if that's something that we need to replicate. So just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about programs. And remember too, that something that's supplemental doesn't necessarily have to cost money. It could be time, for sure. If you want to, one of the things that I think of, and one of the things that I tried to implement in my, when I was a principal, was during the day doing an intervention time. That didn't cost us any money. The same, FTEs, it was the same, everything was the same, but we had that built-in intervention time when the students were able to move, from one class to another and be leveled. And so that was something that was a free resource, but we were able to put that in as a supplemental and be able to work with those kids that really needed it. So it doesn't have to cost money, but definitely something that you need to put in that list. And then accountability. How are you going to make sure that this thing is working? And what are you going to do if it's not working? Always something to keep in mind. All right, remembering that we don't want to use our math to justify actions. We want to make sure that we're using our programs with intention. So instead of just saying, oh, we'll just, get more, hire more teachers so we have smaller class size. Well, no, what are you going to do with the smaller class size? We're going to do small group instruction. We're going to embed time for teacher collaboration. We're going to, what are the different things that we're going to do with those smaller class sizes? Smaller class size by itself is not going to fix anything unless you're working with the instruction as well. So this is a page that you guys have access to. And what it is you should be able to convert it and be able to type in there, is you would list all of your staff. You can list all of your facilities, all of your books and supplies, and then start having a conversation with whoever it may be about what is base of our staff. What do we need? We have to have a principal. Somebody has to run the school. We have to have teachers, but what's our ratio to teachers? There is legislation, there is statute that says how many teachers you need to have in each student to teacher ratio, but do you have an agreement with your teachers? What does that look like? So having those conversations, and then what is supplemental? So we know our base and core. What are we doing that is above and beyond, or that is more than the base, or that's there specifically to increase and improve services for our unduplicated students? And listing those things here. What this helps with, if we do have to do budget cuts at some point, we know things that we can't cut. We have our list already of our base. We do have our supplemental, and some of those things, we might need to shift or change, or at some point, we don't know what it's going to look like. So we have to just be ready. And then on this one, it's the intended result. Because we offer this tutoring for our EL students, what do we expect to happen? And then what is actually happening? And then the conversation for next year for your LCAP should be, okay, this didn't happen. Should we get rid of this? Should we modify it? Should we try one more year, see if it works? So just making sure that you're having that conversation and keeping that in your minds. Like we said, we can help you with this. If you guys want to Zoom or whatever, we do it with a lot of different districts. And it is hard because a lot of times you're talking about people. And sometimes we need to make a shift and it involves a person, and that's okay. We have to do what's best for our students at all times. All right. The last section about this is the mindset shift. And we're shifting from that compliance to performance. So we're not just filling out the LCAP because we have to fill out the LCAP to get our budget approved. We're filling out the LCAP so that we can improve our students' academic achievement. That's the goal, or their connectedness to school, or whatever it may be. So instead of asking, can I spend my money on this? You should be asking, should I spend my money on this? Should I spend my LCAP funds on a tutor, or should I spend it on something else? What are we going to do to help increase and improve services for those unduplicated students? Just some more reflection questions. How will you know if the action is increasing or improving services? You have to be measuring. You have to have those metrics in place. And Brian's going to talk about metrics in a little bit. But if we're not measuring and if we don't know what our specific outcomes are supposed to be, how are we going to know if it worked? We're not. And then finally, you know, what evidence or research supports if you said, yeah, this is working great? Well, okay, show me. What's your evidence or research that supports that? And how have your stakeholders been addressed in all this? And I know that's tricky right now. It's a difficult thing to think about stakeholders, but there's a lot of different ways to involve stakeholders until we hear that we can change timelines. As of right now, we have to think about involving those stakeholders. So Zoom is available, surveys are a great way to do that. You know, there's a lot of different ideas out there. Just be careful about Zoom bombing. I guess that's a thing now. All right. So I want to take a few minutes and I want you guys to just think about, we'll do like 3 minutes. Think about these questions. How might you approach this work of defining the base with your school? Who would you like to involve in this conversation? What different aspects of your school will you need to consider? So think about that list: programs, staff, facilities. What barriers exist in completing this process? There's a few right now. And what support might you need? So I'm going to mute myself for a few minutes. I'm going to check the chat, and then I'm going to give us like 3 minutes to look at this, and then we'll all come back together.
Just some questions about material study there.
Okay, guys. Thank you for taking that time. I have one more little section And there was some great conversation in the chat, so I really appreciate that. I have one more section in here that I'm going to talk about goals, and then it'll be Brian's turn to share. So goals and actions, and writing effective goals and actions. So as you know, with the new template, we have some options. So they've given us a little bit of flexibility of some goals that we can write. And we're going to look at the types of goals. There's 3 different types. There's the focus goal, the broad goal, and the maintenance of progress goal. Now, you don't have to put each and every one of these in your LCAP. You don't even have to have one of each. It's up to you. It's whatever works for you and your stakeholders. That is what you need to put into your LCAP. And we're going to go over each of these types of goals. And then if you have any conversation, any questions, then we can have a conversation about that later. So a focus goal. This one is concentrated, it's time bound, and it's measurable. So it's what we would call focused. Definitely able to pinpoint something with this. So this is one that we wrote that we thought, hey, this sounds like a pretty good one. By spring 2021, English learners, foster youth, and SED students groups will show a decline of at least 2% in chronic absenteeism as measured by absent report G2 from our student information system and ultimately reflected on the 2021 California School Dashboard. That's part of the goal description. Now, the explanation of why the LEA developed this goal is right underneath that goal description. So you have to have both of these things together. So this is where you're going to put in the information about why you picked this specific goal. So after reviewing the dashboard data, we discovered that all student groups had an increase in chronic absenteeism rates, with foster youth falling into the red with 22.5% chronically absent, SED in the orange with 18, and English learners in the orange with 13. Absenteeism rates were shared with all stakeholder groups, and empathy interviews were conducted in order to define a root cause for the increase in absenteeism. After consultation with stakeholders and root cause analysis, it was confirmed that chronic absenteeism should be made a focus goal with the following actions put into place. So that's just kind of a broad, well, not a broad, that's a focus, how you could write one of those focus goals, and then using that data to be able to explain why you picked that specific goal. A broad goal is less concentrated, and it can have a wider range of metrics. So for our broad goal, we said implement measures at all schools to foster positive school environments and student supports. Now, broad goals is what a lot of our current goals sound like. So this might sound familiar to you because you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of what our goal is right now. And that's okay. If you guys want to keep those goals, if that's something that you're passionate about, then that's what you guys need to decide with your stakeholders. But an explanation of why you might be doing that. The district, along with stakeholder groups, looked at a variety of data in order to create this goal. In addition to surveys given to students and parents at each school site, we also looked at attendance data, DNF lists, and after reviewing all the necessary data, stakeholder group discussed various reasons for why students may not feel connected to school and may be missing class. In order to improve attendance and connectedness at all school sites, the following actions will be implemented. So just explaining why did we pick that as a goal. And then the last one is a maintenance goal. And this is something that's ongoing without significant changes. So something that's going well. If your school is doing really well at something and you want to keep it going, this is where you would put that a maintenance goal in. So we want to continue actions to foster positive school climate. Pretty basic. And then after reviewing the data in regards to connectedness, the group concluded that current actions being implemented are effective. Chronic absenteeism and suspension rates have decreased for all student groups across all sites. Student and parent connectedness surveys indicate that there is an increase in the number of students who feel connected to their school and supported by staff. The district plans to continue the following actions. So just being very specific in why you're picking a goal and what, you don't have to say what type of goal it is. When we read it, if you're doing FastPass, we'll be able to, pinpoint what type it is. But it's good for you to know and for your stakeholders to know what types of goals that you're going to be doing. So again, we're just going to take 2 minutes really quick. I want you guys to think about your own LCAP. I want you to think about your data, your dashboards, your surveys, areas of growth, your charter petition, your charter goals, and the 8 state priorities. And think about in your current status in this crazy world that we live in, what area might you want to write a focus goal according to your student needs? What area might you want to write a broad goal And then what area might you want to write a maintenance goal in correlation with data showing growth or progress in a specific area. So be specific, thinking about what areas might I want to write these goals in. I'm just going to give you guys 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to start sharing my screen here with Brian. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll get right to them.
Hi, Alicia, you disabled participant screen sharing, so you need to.
Well, that wasn't very nice of me.
Yeah. Which does stop your presentation from being hijacked, I guess, but.
I guess, right?
Okay, I got it now.
All right. And Brian, I was going to give him like 1 more minute, and then, so whenever you're ready.
Okay. My squeaky chair. Well, thanks everyone. I'm going to go ahead and continue on. And I know some of this you'll need to maybe re-engage some of your teams at another time to have these conversations. But I'm going to talk a little bit now about metrics and meaningful metrics. I know with the change in the new template, there's been a lot of questions about how to write these 3-year goals. So I'm going to jump into that. So this is a slide we showed you last time we met. Just a reminder on the new template, you're asked to identify the metric, identify your baseline, which might be 2019 dashboard data or other recent data. No, we do recommend a best practice to identify the origin and year of data. So it's real clear what you're measuring. And then you're, for this year in the LCAP template, you're identifying your desired outcome for 22-23. It's a 3-year target. You're going to actually leave these 3 middle boxes blank at this time. So to see an example what this might look like, here's an example of Smarter Balance results that are identified as the baseline and then the 3-year target. A couple things I'll note on this slide before I move on. Notice that the way this baseline and target was written for Smarter Balance, they're looking at the distance from standard and not percent proficient or percent met and exceeded. And the reason for that is to align with how the dashboard reports this data. And so as much as possible, you should align your metrics to the dashboard methodology. It's just going to help with your communication with stakeholders and transparency. The other thing I'll notice, have you notice on this slide, is notice that the metrics, the outcomes are slightly differentiated for the different groups. So for all students, to go from 40 points above standard to 55 points above standard, obviously that would be a growth of 15 points over 3 years. But the EL students in this example would go from 30 points below to 5 points above. That would be an increase of 35 points over 3 years. So, so just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through these examples. So what must you include? Well, you do need to address all 8 state priorities. And you might recall in the old template, there was a checkbox to identify which of the 8 state priorities you were addressing for each goal. In the new template, that does not exist. So how you know that you are addressing all of the 8 state priorities is to include all the required metrics. So here's a snapshot of what you can see from the California School Dashboard, that both the state indicators and the local indicators. This next screen shows a pretty comprehensive list. We've shared this with you at the last meeting, and it's also available in the materials today. Just all the different required metrics that's in Ed Code. I know some of the one exception here would be if you are a charter that does not have high school students, then obviously you're not addressing, you know, the high school specific metrics. So just keep in mind this would be adjusted based on the population you are serving. So again, what must you include on metrics? So in the instructions for the LCAP template, you're going to do the most recent data that you have, which typically would be the 2019 dashboard for many of the metrics. And then again, that second bullet point talking about aligning how you're reporting metrics to the same manner as how it's reported in the school dashboard. So a couple of things to keep in mind while you're going through this goal setting, metric setting. We now have a number of years of data for many metrics. So you have, you're able to know your baseline. You can look at your past trends. What level of growth is reasonable given your past trends? And you could compare that to other similar schools, districts, statewide growth to get an idea about what's reasonable. But this last bullet point is probably the most significant. So when you're setting a target, think about what programs or policies, what actions you are putting in your LCAP and going to implement that's actually going to address improving that metric. And I'll get into that a little more detail here, but you know, any amount of growth is probably not realistic if you aren't doing anything to affect that growth. So I'm going to give you an example here, and I have a little note here with the example I uses the academic indicator 5x5 grids. I know that as charter schools, sometimes your dashboard metrics can be a little not as complete as maybe a district would be because of your population size. But note that what I'm going to show you about these 5x5 grids applies to every single 5x5 grid. It's not just unique to the academic indicators. And it applies whether you're using the DAS indicators or the regular indicators. They're all these principles all work. The other thing as a reminder is on the dashboard, you need 30 students in a student group to receive a color. However, if you have 11 or more students, you will receive the data. You'll have the actual numbers. So you may not have colors for some of your student groups, but you might have some data reported. So just a couple of things about the 5x5 grids and how it can relate to setting targets. So this is a typical 5x5 grid. As I said before, this is the academic indicator for ELA, but it works the same for all of the 5x5 grids. All of the grids are constructed so that if you can land on the right-hand side of the grid, your indicator will never be red, with one exception. The one exception is graduation rate has to be above 68%, but that's the only exception. Every other indicator, even if you're in the very low status row, down at the very bottom, you will always be at least orange or higher on your reported level, regardless of the indicator. So again, in this example for academic indicator, to get to that increased column, you would have to grow by 3 points. So you would likely want to set a target to be at least 3 or more growth points per year. The other thing about how all of the grids are constructed is the cell I've highlighted here is always green for every indicator. That becomes significant because the State Board of Education has identified that cell that's highlighted as the long-term goal in the Every Student Succeeds Act state plan for several of the indicators. So to reach that cell, the student group would need to have the high status. So in this example, a +10 distance from standard on the ELA CAS results. But that cell is the same target cell for every 5x5 grid. So that can maybe suggest to you where you should be aiming for over the next couple of years. So let's take a look then about how this might work as an activity for you to do with your teams whenever you're actually able to get together again. So I'll kind of talk through this, and then I'm going to give you a specific example. So the idea would be use the 5x5 grid to plot the current status for each identified student group. And then once you know their current status, you can calculate what growth is needed to meet the target status. And then you could start asking yourself these questions. Is this target reasonable? What would this mean as a growth per year over 3 years? And then again, that all-important question, what planned actions and services are we actually implementing to help us achieve that target? So here's what this would look like. So I'm going to do this activity as if I were a district or a charter school. So the idea would be I'm going to plot my current status. So I can look on the current dashboard and see, okay, my all students group, they scored a -5.2 distance from standard, and they landed in this cell that I've highlighted here. Let's take a look at EL students, and they were at a -71, and then students with disabilities was a -89.7. So that's quite a bit below the benchmark. So the next idea would be, what would I need to grow then over 3 years to get to that target cell? And so now it's just a little bit of a math problem. I compared that to, Alicia changed my number on this, so my math doesn't quite work on the EL. But the idea would be, so it's all students to get to a +10 would have to grow 15.2 points. So that's a growth of 5.1 per year. that probably should be doable. Take a look at your past trends, and you can get a sense of how you've been doing. I'm going to skip the EL right now because that number doesn't quite work, but students with disabilities. So if my current group of students with disabilities is at a minus 89.7, then I'm going to need to grow almost 100 points, 33 points a year. And that starts to seem like a pretty big stretch over 3 years. So let's start asking ourselves these questions. Is this expected growth reasonable? So now you need to take a look at what your goals are and what actions you have planned. So if I have a very specific targeted action that I have confidence in is really going to address the needs of my students with disabilities student group, then maybe I am confident of setting a more aggressive goal for that group. So you really need to compare your nothing happens in isolation. You have to look at your goals, your actions, and your metrics all as a kind of a unified piece to see where you're going. The other thing to then think about, so if we say, okay, it's not realistic to grow almost 100 points, but I do want to set an aggressive growth target, so where else can I maybe target? So I can use the 5x5 grid to help me with that. So instead of trying to get to the high status of plus 10, maybe I look at getting to the medium status of minus 5. Or even in this case, because I need to get moving in the right direction, maybe my students with disabilities target is to get to that low status, which would be a minus 70. That would still be a growth of almost 20 points. Maybe I want to set a target of minus 60 or minus 50 to make it a little more aggressive. So you don't always have to jump to that high status in 3 years, but make sure you're, I think the key thing would be if your all students target is 15 points and your students with disabilities group is farther behind than that, you want to set a more aggressive target for that group. You certainly don't want to set a target of less than 15 points. Otherwise, you're never going to close that achievement gap. So if we were all sitting in a big room together like the old days, and by the old days, I mean like 6 weeks ago, we would have you do this activity with your own data, have you pick one of the 5x5 grids and look up your data, have you plot it, have you calculate the growth. But we're going to save that to have you do kind of offline when you're able to engage your groups together, your stakeholder groups or your planning team, to kind of walk through how you might set some of these targets. So we're not going to pause now to do that. We'll leave that for offline. The last thing I'll leave you with before we move on from metrics is to really carefully document your data source, think about how you're measuring interim progress, and how you're going to collect this data. So we have a sample tool for you. There's a copy of it in the shared resources. The reason why this is important is because if any of you have had the fun of inheriting an LCAP that was written before you got to your current position, sometimes one of the biggest challenges is to figure out where the previous person who wrote the LCAP actually identified and calculated these metrics. It can be a little bit of a mystery at times. So the more you can document, you will help yourself a year from now when you're filling out your annual update, and your stakeholders can be more engaged in the process. helps with transparency. So here's what this potential tool might look like. So if you have, if you want to use this, again, there's a sample in the shared documents. So, so the example we have here is on English learner reclassification rate, but of course you can certainly list all your different metrics. So, so just a place to record your methodology, where you're going to get the data from, whether it's from the dashboard, from CalPads, from your local student information system, wherever it might be, what your baseline is, so where you're starting at, where do you want to be in 3 years, so to write that down, and then this last column here is very important. How will you monitor progress? So I think this becomes extremely important now, because we know for certain we're not administering CASP assessments this year. You're not administering any more of the summative LPAC tests, very likely. So some of the things that we would be measuring, you're not going to have. Chronic absenteeism, who knows what that looks like. It's pretty likely that the State Board of Education, the CDE, is not going to publish a dashboard in any significant way this coming year. So what other ways can you measure your progress? You know, if it's smarter balance assessments we've been talking about and we don't give those, so here's where you could talk about, maybe you're going to look at your benchmark assessments, or if you give some other kind of diagnostic assessment as a way to see, are we keeping pace until such time that we get back to having the dashboard indicators. So, so again, that's available to you. We encourage you to use, if not this document, something like this to document how you're creating these metrics. And that's pretty much my last slide. I hit the copy. So here we go. Hopefully you could still, I think I went to not full screen, but we'll end up again giving you a little time to just reflect on this section. I'll check the chat to see if there's anything that come up that, of course, I know Alicia or Naomi may have been answering the questions as they come up, and we'll give you a chance to reflect. So again, think about your metrics. How are you communicating these to your stakeholders? How are you aligning your metrics to your goals and actions? So Alicia talked in her section about how you know, it might look slightly different whether you have that more targeted goal or a broad goal, or a maintenance or progress goal. And so I will stop talking, give you guys a chance to reflect, and then I think Alicia will pick it back up here in a moment.
Yeah. So let's take like 5 minutes if you need a potty break or anything, and then start thinking about these metrics, and then I'm going to steal the screen back from Brian here. Okay, guys, about 1 more minute.
Alicia, when you're ready, let me go back and address a question in the chat for everyone.
Okay, is it the one about end size?
No, it's the one about how to show that you're addressing all the metrics.
Oh, okay.
So are other things.
I have my timer set and we have literally 1 minute, so I'll let you know. All right, guys, I have 1 second and there we go. Okay, so welcome back. I hope you had a great little break. Brian did say he wanted to answer a question in the metrics section. And Brian, if we have a minute, I actually wouldn't mind if you would be willing to address a couple of those questions, because there were a few, one in particular that I wanted to have a conversation about was the end size. And that was a very good question. I got an answer from our data team, but I don't know if you can address that too. So Brian, are you on?
Yeah, let me, you could stay screen sharing. So,
Okay.
and I do apologize everyone for my squeaky chair. I didn't realize how squeaky my chair was until everyone's quiet and I don't know, I wiggle. So I'm gonna get WD-40 when this is all over. Okay, Alicia, can you go back to slide 36?
Sure.
Just real quick, bring that one up. And so we had a couple of questions in the chat. One of the questions was around, so how do you know you're addressing all 8 state priorities if there's no longer the checkboxes that used to be in the template? So what will happen is whoever's reviewing your LCAP, now that may not be, depending on your exact charter situation, that may be different people. But in order to show that you're meeting the priorities, the reviewer would actually look at this chart kind of backwards. So in order to show that you're meeting priority 1, basic services, we're going to look for the 3 required metrics that says, are teachers appropriately assigned credentialed? Do students have access to instruction materials? And our school facilities are maintaining good repair. So if we do not see the metrics in your LCAP, then we're going to say, if we were reviewing your LCAP, we would say you're not addressing priority 1. So, so you're going to show your meeting priorities by including all of the required metrics. Of course, you can add more metrics, but these are the required ones in the legislation. The other question that I had was, so how do you address something like priority 2 or priority 7? So Priority 2 is implementation of state standards. So you can address that a couple of different ways, but probably the easiest way is to reference the local indicator. So there is a local indicator for implementation of state standards. It's a rubric that you use with your stakeholder team. So you can use that as a basis for forming your metric, but it could be other ways if you have some other ways to document that you're implementing California state standards. The same with number 7, broad course of study. Again, there is a local indicator for that, so you can reference that as one way to meet priority 7. The other thing to kind of help you with that, in the there is a document in the shared resources. It's called State Priority Metrics. It's a PDF. We shared this with you, I think, at our last meeting, and it's just another format of these of this document. So it will. So if you look in their shared folders, it's number 4, State Priority Metrics. It will show for each priority, and it has kind of the recommended metrics or the required metrics and a potential data source. Whether it's local data, local indicators, statewide indicators, and so on and so forth. So I think that will answer those. And then Alicia, you wanted to address the N size. What happens if you have fewer than 10 students?
Yeah, so I did text our data team just to see, and Brian, you are welcome to jump in on that. Somebody had asked, obviously we don't put it in the public data on DataQuest or the dashboard if it's smaller than 10 because of privacy issues. So should we be addressing those same student groups in our LCAP because it is a public document? That's a great question. And both of the people that I spoke to, Nick and Steve, both said that they would avoid putting that data in the LCAP just because obviously it is a privacy issue. And if the state's doing that, then that's something that we should follow. I will email LCFF though and get a more concrete answer for that, and then I'll send it out to everybody. But that's what it sounds like the running answer is for now. So any other questions, guys, keep them coming. That's great conversation. So I'm gonna go through here and get to our action.
Can
section.
I follow up on that really quick? So my student groups that I'm specifically looking at that are hidden are my unduplicated students. So my foster, my EL, and often my SPED students aren't included, but I know we're supposed to have a focus on those kids. So that's where I'm kind of concerned is I can pull information internally because we're supposed to be looking at them. In the meantime, I just have a note that it's not publicly available. So are we going to be okay if it's specifically those unduplicated groups?
So what they're saying, Steve and Nick are saying, is that you can still put those actions in there. I just wouldn't put that specific data for those groups. You might want to put a little statement that says, after reviewing the data for these groups, it was, we noticed that we needed to do blah, blah, blah action, but then putting a little asterisk in there about this group is smaller than 10, so no hard data will be available. Just so that we know that you're looking at it, you have a reason why you put that action in there. You have an action for those kiddos, but you're not putting that data in there because it might be, somebody might be able to find out who those kids are because it's such a small group. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Speaking of actions, we're going to jump into actions. And it was funny, the conversation that Naomi and Brian had when we were putting this together, because we were thinking about, do we do goals first or metrics first or actions first? Or because it all is very cyclical. That's the word. Everything goes together. You need your metrics to be able to write your goals and your actions, and you need your actions to be able to speak to your goals. So it all just goes together. So we decided to go in the format that the template is in. So now we're going to talk about actions. And this is a neat little display about narrowing our focus for our actions. So we want to begin at the bottom of that base, that pyramid, right, of forethought. We want to think ahead about what are the needs of our kiddos? What does our data tell us? What does our stakeholder input tell us? That's our number one focus. That's what we always have to be thinking about throughout our whole time that we're writing our LCAP or any kind of action for our kiddos, right? And then our through line, we want to keep that forethought all the way through. We want to see the same thing happening in your plan summary as is happening in your increased improved services. It all needs to go together. And those actions and services that you're writing need to speak to whatever you've written before. So those actions and services that are provided to all students are going to be in there. And then the very tip of that pyramid is those actions and services that are specifically for increasing and improving services for your unduplicated students. Even though they could be wide, one of the goals that I had written earlier could focus on everybody. Chronic absenteeism is a focus for everybody. But because we're implementing these things, these groups should increase even more. So I always wished when I was writing actions that I had a nice little steps to get me through it. So I've written some steps. And if these don't make sense to you, that's fine. You don't have to use them, but they made sense to me. So first you want to review the goal. What's our goal that we want to get to at the end of this LCAP season? The 3 years, the 1 year, whatever it might be. You want to review those metrics. Okay, what are we using to measure this goal, our work, our progress towards this goal? After you have that data available, after you've had those conversations, you need to speak to your stakeholders. What data does our dashboard tell us? What does our internal data tell us? And engage those stakeholders. And then you want to look back. What did we do last year? What did we do in our previous LCAP cycle? Did it work? If it did, are we going to adopt it, adapt it, or abandon it? We need to think about that continuous improvement cycle. And just because it's been in there before doesn't mean we're going to keep it in there. We want to review the most recent data on our evidence and some evidence-based interventions. So making sure that we are using the most proven actions to help support our students, and then create those new actions based on data, evidence, and stakeholder input. All right. So what is this going to look like? So here is an example of when you look at the template, you have the title, you have the description, and then the funding and is it contributing to. So for this one, it's an action for, it's called Positive Actions Whole School Reform Strategy. And I'm going to show you where I got that information here in a minute. The description is all elementary schools will implement the Positive Action Whole School Reform Strategy. And then the effect size of plus 0.02 per evidence for ESSA. The program will be implemented with fidelity as evidenced by administrative walkthroughs and student connectedness surveys. Student connectedness will improve by 15% as measured by student connectedness surveys, and attendance will increase by 2% for unduplicated pupils with a specific focus on our students with socioeconomically disadvantaged and foster youth. Our total funds is $15,700, and yes, this is a contributing action. So you're going to not just put a description of, oh, it's a program that we purchased. It's no, how are we going to use this? How are we going to measure this? How are we going to know that this is successful? That's what we want to see when you describe those actions. Another one, a functional behavior assessment based interventions. All schools will conduct functional behavior assessments for students receiving discipline referrals. Due to the implementation of FBA interventions, referrals will decrease by 20% as measured by student behavior tracking system. This is $3,000. And no, it's not necessarily contributing to, because this is for all of our students. It's not just going to help our unduplicated students, but this is for everybody. This website, I need to share it with you guys so that I think I shared it within a PDF, but I'll share it so you can click on the links. These are places that you can go to research some different evidence-based interventions. So if you click on evidence for ESSA, it'll take you to the website. If you're currently doing a program and you want to see if it's helping, you can type that in and see what the how well it will help your students. It gives you all of that data, that analysis data. And then you can also, if you're looking for something, you're saying, hey, we're struggling with math in my 8th grade, you can put in math, you can put in the grade level, and it'll give you different resources that you can use. So these are all different websites that you have an opportunity to go to and check out and see if they have some good ideas for how to help your students. Another thing this year that's new, and I know there's a lot of conversation around it, is actions for English learners. So starting this year, you must include actions for your English learners. And it does specifically say in the language, at a minimum, the language acquisition program and professional development for the students. So just a reminder, you have to have those actions in there. We don't have any guidance yet on what exactly that looks like. If it's contributing to or not, it's still a conversation that's up in the air. So we're in conversations with CDE about that. Obviously, things have been put on the back burner right now because everything is different. But as soon as we get the answers to that, we'll share with you guys. I did write an action for English learners, though. One that was obviously contributing to, because this is obviously a supplemental action. I actually mentioned it before, but it's English language learner instructional aids. So if you have the funds, Title III, LCAP funds, you can hire some instructional aides to support English learners who are struggling academically in a small group setting. These instructional aides will be trained in strategies to support English learners and will be able to support students in their home language. So something that's an option, let's say it costs $25,000, and yeah, it would be contributing to increasing and improving services for our English learners. So just a reminder, when you're writing your actions, you have to think about, how will we measure this action? If I hire an instructional aide, what am I going to do to make sure that that is a successful endeavor? Am I going to do a pre and a post assessment with the students? Am I going to have a running record of how much time has been spent, what things were worked on, and we're going to be assessing those kiddos? So just think about how we're going to be measuring those actions. We can't be sure if an action is improving outcomes unless we measure it. And we won't be able to tell what actions had the most impact unless we're very explicit about how to measure those. So just a reminder about that constant measurement. Catalina always says, if you can't measure it, you shouldn't be doing it. And so, you need to be able to measure what's happening in your school. All right, I am gonna take like 2 minutes because we're gonna hand this over to Naomi, that's gonna talk about increased and improved services. One of the things, though, I did want to point out while I'm switching sharing here is that we need to be very explicit when we're talking about our increased and improved services. One of the things that they, and Naomi may discuss it, and I'm in my little bubble here, but this article came out, and I don't see it as much as an issue with charters, but definitely something to keep in mind. People are reading your LCAPs. They are looking for your increased and improved. There's been many uniform complaints. This one is about districts that were using their funds to hire police officers and how that's not a proper use of LCAP funds. So just something to keep in mind as Naomi's talking about increased and improved is just being very aware of what you've put in your LCAP and making sure that it's really student focused at all times. So I'm gonna hand it over to Naomi. We can take a few minutes because I do want to check out the chat. So let's take like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and I'm gonna check out the chat and give you a minute to think about any questions you might have due to actions, in regards to actions. All right, Naomi, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for hanging in there. Mine's kind of a long section because I'll go through increased improved services, but also give an example of just thinking through the through line piece and underscoring what that looks like. So let me see how I can control the slides here. So what we're going to do is delve into action descriptions that appropriately describe principally directed and how they can be effective in meeting your charter's goals for unduplicated students, particularly foster youth, English learners, and low income. So this slide is a screenshot that shows the gist of what's to be described. So you know in the top left, you've got your fiscal things, you've got insert your percentage and dollar amounts in the top two boxes, but then the bottom two narratives in the first prompt, you have to talk about your wide actions and how those are principally directed and effective in outcomes for those student groups. And then in the second prompt, you have to show how services grow in quality and quantity as compared to services provided for all students. So you're describing your increase in improvement in services there. And Title V of the California Code of Regulations provides this guidance to us, which is why we have to have these actions that show, or these descriptions that show how supplemental concentration funds will be used for unduplicated student groups. So this shows a sort of a blend of the template and the instructions. So at the top is the template description or explanation. So you'll see that is on page 5. And then the bottom part of it is a screenshot of the increased improved sections instruction. And so,
Naomi?
Yes.
Sorry, did you hear that? Can you maybe get closer or speak up a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't know why my mic's not working.
That's okay.
Hold on, let me see if I can turn it up a little bit. Okay, sorry, I don't have the chat on. Thank you for that.
That sounds better. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I'll hold my mic close to my mouth. Okay, so again, this is a blend of the template and instructions. And so this is just underscoring the 3 criteria that are needed for the description. The first one is, and so you see that first bullet in the middle of the page, the action should consider the needs, conditions, and circumstances of unduplicated students. The second one is a description of the action, but taking into account those needs, conditions, and circumstances. And then the third bullet talks to a metric that's aligned specifically to showing student outcomes that the action is aligned to get to. Then that final statement on the bottom is talking about what the state is calling conclusory statements. And so if you can see your screen, take a moment to read that brief statement that they put there. And what we'll do is we'll delve further into what conclusory statements are and why they're not permitted in the description. Oh, look, I had some animation and I'm not using this. Okay, let me see if this works now. Okay. Sorry, I'm having mouse and keyboard trouble. All right, and then on this slide, we're talking about those 3 bullets again, but I want to show you how they relate to the 3 learning questions in the improvement, in the Learning to Improve book. And so when we talk about improvement science, we're asking these questions, right? We're asking, what specifically are we trying to accomplish? And that aligns with the needs, conditions, and circumstances for duplicated students. The actions, well, that talks to what change might we introduce and why. What are we going to actually do? And then the effectiveness question is how our action helps achieve expected goals. So what is it that that we will actually do to make an improvement? And how will we measure that? And so just to give an understanding of where these questions came from and how they align to improvement, since the LCAP is based on continuous improvement. And so describing an action is principally directed. This pretty much summarized the explanation of what I just, of the expectation of what I just said that needs to be part of the action description. So I won't go into that. And now we get into conclusory statements. And so this is what a conclusory statement is. It's a statement that a service will help achieve an expected outcome for a goal without an explicit connection or further explanation as to how those statements are not sufficient. So here's an example of a conclusory statement. This action is principally directed towards and effective in meeting the needs of our duplicated students. So there's really no description of the needs conditions. There's no explanation of what the action is. It's just a justification, but there's no talking about what the needs are and what the district is or the charter is intending to do to address those needs. Other conclusory statements that have been seen in LCAPs talk about enrollment. So a charter may say, well, we have a high number of unduplicated students, so automatically these actions will invariably improve those outcomes. And so here's an example of a conclusory statement that wouldn't be permitted because using the justification of enrollment. Oops, sorry. And then to summarize, conclusory statements aren't sufficient because, and here are some three reasons, they don't provide a through line between the need and action, just like I talked about. You know what your students need, but you are not articulating that in an action or metrics to show how you will fill that need and address it. Again, bullet 2 talks about that too. And then bullet 3 is also a reflection on that. And so that forethought in understanding, here's what our students need, here are the circumstances around it. And so these actions take into account those needs and conditions, and this is what we're going to do for those. So when we go into the new template, the instructions note that in order to carry over an action from the 2019-20 LCAP into this 2020-21 LCAP, you should have data that shows that that action was effective. If you do, and stakeholders agree that, okay, this worked, and this is what we see in terms of outcomes for our kids, then yes, let's move that over. So that description or that image on the right side of your screen just depicts action 1 was effective, so yeah, we're going to keep it. So was action 2, and we're not going to, action 2 was not, but we're going to change it because we know that this change might affect positive outcomes for kids. 3, no, it wasn't effective, and we don't think it's going to work, so we're just not going to carry it over into the LCAP, to the new LCAP. So that's what this new instruction addresses. So now I'll go into an action description that includes the 3 criteria. So the first set of slides I'm going to show you is one example, but it's broken up into the 3 conditions. So here's an example of an action where you might have determined that low-income students have significantly lower attendance rate than everybody else, and so here's what we want to do about it. And the way we would describe it in an action is this. After assessing the needs, conditions, and circumstances of our low-income students, we learned that the attendance rate of our low-income students is 7% lower than the attendance rate for all students. So our need and condition is that we need to increase their attendance rate. Their condition is that it's lower than everybody else's. And so what is our action going to be? And here's the second part of the criteria in the same description. In order to address this condition, we will develop and implement a new attendance program designed to address some of the major causes of absenteeism, including lack of reliable transportation and food, as well as school climate that does not emphasize the importance of attendance. So now we're telling that we've got goal N, actions X, Y, and Z provide additional transportation and nutritional resources, as well as a district-wide educational campaign on the benefits of high attendance rates. So these are the 3 actions in goal N that we're going to use to ameliorate low attendance. And then the last part of the description talks about the metrics. And so you can see here that we're going to measure the attendance rate of the students after implementing these actions. And so So that was one that I just split up. So now the second example shows you the action in its entirety. It's long because we have to address those 3 criteria in one action, including the needs conditions, the action itself, and the metrics. So see, reading this on your own, can you identify those 3 criteria in this action? So what's my need? English learners have a performance gap in comprehension, and they don't have, and the condition is that they don't have access to quality reading materials outside of school. So the action is, well, we're going to offer a reading club and pilot a book in the bag program. And what are we going to do to measure that outcomes increase for English learners? Well, we'll look at their summative reading test and their CAS ELA scores to see that this action has impacted those outcomes. And here's how I broke it down. So here you have the action in its entirety, and here's now deconstructing it into those 3 criteria that are required in the description. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some time for you to dig into just a few actions. So pick one of your goals, take a look at some of the actions that you had marked as contributing to the increased improved services for English learner, foster youth, or low income, and just take a look at your descriptions. Are they meeting the description criteria that's included in the instructions? And if not, what might need to be changed to ensure that those descriptors are included there? So I'll give you about 5 minutes. Is that okay, Alicia? Is 5 minutes a good time? Okay. So I'll give you 5 minutes to take a dig deep into your LCAP. I know 5 minutes is not a lot, but I'll give you that time right now. Okay, we'll come back together in about a minute. All right, welcome back. If you have any questions around the increased improved services, we'll actually delve a little more into detail and you'll see an example of it when we go through the next section about through line concept and thought process for action. So let's go into that right now. So as previously noted, we know that through line is the thoughtful connection that exists between all sections of the LCAP. And so here's a definition of forethought, which is what we want to keep in mind as we go through this next section. So here is a plan summary from XYZ School District, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to read the description of XYZ so you are familiar with them. Sorry, it should be XYZ Academy, not School District. Okay, so you know a little bit about XYZ Academy. It's between P and Q. There's 2 large prisons and an ICE detention center in the area. So we can imagine what where the workforce is and that maybe some of these trauma-related behaviors that the school officials observe within the community perhaps may be related to that. You can see that they've got quite a bit of kids. Half of their students qualify for low income since they participate in the National School Lunch Program. And then you can see that their unduplicated count is above 55%. It's at 57.7%. So now let's take a look how we might develop an action that fits well and goes with the through line, knowing the students, what the needs are, any gaps that we need to address, what our stakeholders are saying, and then what actions we might have in general for everybody, but also those that are targeted for our English learner foster youth and low-income students for this community. And so what we're going to do is, before we go into this, I wanted to just set your mindset around what does having a through line mean. And so as I just went through that arrow, we do want to see that there's a connection there. And so some questions you ask yourself might be, does the content or story remain consistent in telling a coherent story from the plan summary all the way through increased improved services? Do all of the parts connect, or does any information just appear to come out of nowhere? If a stakeholder reads a section or part of the LCAP, is it easily understandable how it connects the whole plan as a whole? And then do actions align with the needs and their goals along with the corresponding metrics? Do all sections align with what's reflected in the plan summary and stakeholder engagement? So if you find that any of the answers to the questions I posed are no, then there may not be a well-developed through line. So what we're going to do is, starting with the slide, and I'll just do a mental modeling of it, is we'll look at the through line concept, focusing on an action that's considered contributing and specific language and forethought in planning out the actions. So that then we'll look at what it looks like in the increased improved services actions section. So then we look at what we know about our students, and we move away from just a general description of what their needs are to a more detailed description based on data. And so this is what we know about students and what we want to do in this particular action for the students in XYZ school district. And when we look at the dashboard at suspension rate, we can see, just as we noted in the previous slide, that we have several student groups with high need. Their performance is in red. And so when we review data, we look at needs and we consider both all groups or individual student groups. In this case, we have 6 groups that have high need. Here's another way to determine some needs. We can look at a student, the student report on the dashboard, and this can show us performance gaps. Where might we see them? We see in math there's a potential performance gap, so we might have some actions aligned to that because we have 4 student groups in red and all students is in yellow. The example I chose was suspension rate. Even though all students are red, this is huge because look, we've got 6 student groups and the all students in red. So something must be done around there. And there's also a gap here. It's not a two color performance gap, but in the chronic absenteeism, we can see all students are orange, but we have quite a few student groups that are red there as well. And so we may see significant difference between student groups that we would want to address. And then when we take into account our stakeholders, have we involved them and documented their input? And then what does that input do to impact our LCAP development? So those are essential components that we must have. If you have a well-developed stakeholder input section, you would include this information in your forethought and contribute, and that would contribute to what actions might be included in your LCAP. And so this just shows the action in the goal, in the action box, in the goals and action section. So it's going to be action 2. It's the brief description is Wellness Center, and here's what we're going to do. The action is create a trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive environment. Creating that provides critical resources students need to overcome and cope with adversity. Our Wellness Center initiative provides low-income students and foster youth with social-emotional support through clinical social workers addressing mental health trauma-related services. Additionally, the initiative provides professional development to equip teachers and staff with the skills and strategies to understand trauma and create a safe and supportive learning environment. So this XYZ Academy gets quite a few funds, so because of their high unduplicated amount, so they're going to make this a contributing action. It's going to cost them $8,000. And so here's what the action looks like. Again, with the examples we saw earlier, they're quite long. And so what you just saw is in the action box is actually this middle part in the purple section. And we'll delve a little more deeply into that in just a second. So these are the 3 components. You'll see the first one in the green font talks about the needs, conditions, and then the purple font talks about the action itself. And then you've got research base and the metrics down in the bottom description. So now let's look at that. Oh, here I had a slide for that shows what aligns to each descriptor in the entire action description. So when we're thinking about it, in your increase improve services, you might have this whole long descriptor, but in your actions box, you'll only have what's in the purple font. And here's an illustration of what that looks like broken down. Okay, so now we're going to break down each piece just so that we can see, are they addressing the different criteria as requested as required in the instructions. So here's the first part. 2/3 of our students in poverty have faced 1 or more of the 10 traumas measured by the Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACEs survey. Many of the discipline issues faced on our campuses represent trauma-related behaviors observed within the community. And we saw that statement in their story. So we know that these are the needs, conditions, and circumstances of their duplicated students. The second part of it is the main action language. What are we doing? What action are we implementing? Well, we're implementing a wellness center And it's going to be for everybody, but we're particularly targeting our low-income students and foster youth with social-emotional support. What are we doing? What are we offering? Well, clinical social workers to address those mental health and trauma-related needs that they have. And we'll also provide professional development for teachers and staff. That's our main action. And then the last part, what are expected outcomes and effectiveness? Well, we're going to measure it with surveys of students to see do they show that, are they showing that they have an increased sense of safety and connectedness to adults at school? And will our office referrals decrease because we are providing this intervention for kids? That's how we will look to see effectiveness of that action. Again, here's what it looks like in the goals and in the action box. And then this last slide is just to underscore that we want to always begin with the end in mind. Now, right now, our current circumstances are a little different. We're in unprecedented times, but we can still think through when we're looking at some of the things we're doing now to implement learning to address our current situation. How might we look at that later on at the end? And with forethought, and if we're looking at our LCAP and our planning in the traditional sense, we consider all of our students' needs based on data and then look to see, okay, what actions will we implement that can be measured so that we show improvement by June? And then that's the through line piece. And just a reminder that much of the work on LCAP doesn't just happen, as a one-time thing. As you all know and understand, it's a process. And now I'll take it back to Alicia. If you have any questions on any parts, please put them in the chat and I'll answer them.
Thank you, Naomi. I think we get most questions about the increase improve section because it is one of the hardest sections to wrap your brain around. But as you can see from what Naomi shared, it is going to be probably the longest section in your whole LCAP because you do have to explicitly explain exactly how these actions are going to help those kiddos. That's the whole point. And I'll tell you right now, when people are reviewing your LCAP to look to see if you're increasing improved services, so the first section they turn to is that increased section. They want to see if ACLU or anybody like that is looking at it. That's what they're going to be looking at. So thank you, Naomi. And if you guys have any questions, let us know. We're here to help. So the e-template, this is the only slide I have for e-template because of a couple of things. I did put in the, I did put in the folder a link to a document on how I'm trying to talk and share at the same time, on how to use the e-template. So you guys go ahead and take some time to look through that. And if you have any questions, just let us know. We're here to help. If you need help getting signed up or whatever it may be, just give us a holler, an email, and we'll be right there. We're not at our phones. And then the last thing is obviously if you have any questions or concerns in regards to any of these different aspects of LCAP or anything that's going on right now, give us a call. I know that I meet with you guys in regards to LCAP, but we do a lot of work in a lot of different areas. So if you guys need support, let us know. Your charter team's amazing, as you know, so they're always there to support you guys too. So please reach out to us if you have any questions or need any support. And with that, we are actually done almost an hour early. So we're working from home. We're here to support you. Let us know anything you need. Does anybody have any last minute questions before we close out here? Everybody's good? All right. Thank you so much, you guys. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you again soon, okay? Bye, everybody.